3, 2, 1. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hi, everyone. Today we're in conversation with Hagar Chemali. Did I say that right?
That's right.
Okay. Hagar Chemali is a political satirist, writer, producer, television personality, and political commentator. She served in national security and public affairs positions under 2 presidential administrations. And she comments and writes on national security and foreign policy at a variety of media outlets, and most importantly, through her own YouTube show, Oh My World. Hagar, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So, I described you in a nutshell, but tell us what I didn't tell our audience that they should know about you.
Well, I think one of the things that has informed a lot of my career and the decisions I've made and how I view the world, it has to do with my background. And I'm born and raised in Greenwich, Connecticut, but my family is from Lebanon, from Beirut. And I grew up with this awareness of international politics, conflict, human rights abuse. My own family regaled me with stories of religious persecution, exile, all sorts of different injustices. They fled the Civil War and settled here in the United States and reminded me every day how lucky I was to be American. And that really, I'm certain, without it, just subconsciously, I think, informed why I pursued a career in international affairs.
Yeah.
Why I wanted to work in the US government, why I felt so strongly about that. And certainly now why my media brand has a very heavy focus on human rights and sharing the stories, exposing the stories of human rights abusers and dictators and such.
Yeah. I mean, your background is I'm glad you raised it, such an important facet of who you are. Having lived through, as you referenced, a bunch of dislocation, conflict, and really a complicated, both personal but also contextual kind of national history in a place like Lebanon, has really shaped who you are.
Yes. People have asked me often if I thought if I envisioned ending up at Oh My World, launching this
Yeah.
media brand, because it's not exactly the typical career path of someone who worked in foreign policy making in Washington, D.C. for 12 years like I did.
Yeah.
And the answer is no. I had no idea that this is where I would be, that I would be a YouTuber or a YouTube host. But I tell people it represents every single part of me, every single part of my career, but also every single part of my life, my personality, how my background shaped my perspective, all was packaged in this media brand of Oh My World. And it's because of, like I said, my strong belief in fighting for justice and in exposing the wrongs around the world, because I believe that fundamentally helps make the world a better place by sharing the stories of those doing good around the world so that people know how to act. It's also a little bit my personality. I did drama in high school, not something I thought I would ever pursue,
Yeah.
but performing is a big part of Oh My World, given the satire and given that you'll often find me in wigs with a bad accent when I impersonate these world leaders. And so
we're about to take a look at an example of that. So 2 years ago, in your first Oh My World video, here's how you described the show. Let's take a quick listen.
Hey, you glorious geeks. I'm Hagar Chemali, and I'm so excited to introduce you to Oh My World, your weekly world news quick and dirty. In under 10 minutes once a week, I'll cover the top world news stories in a fun and easy way, and I'll do it unfiltered and without political agenda. There are real important things happening around the world, and you're not hearing about it. You may not even be aware that these things affect you here. My favorite part is that we're going to expose tyrants and human rights abusers while also lifting up those doing good around the world. I worked at the White House, Treasury, and State Departments. I get what's going on the inside and out. Trust me, this is not something you want to miss. Because if you do, North Korea might just launch a nuclear missile and you may not even be aware. I'm serious. Subscribe and follow us. Send me questions and comments. I want to hear from you, and I'll see you soon.
So, Hagar, what was the gap that you saw in the news and the media that you were trying to fill with this show?
Yes. When I left government in 2016, I thought I really wanted to be a foreign policy analyst for one of the major networks.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of commentary. I did back then. I still do a lot of commentary. I really enjoy it. There's a lot of lights and action to it, a lot of glamour. But the part that felt missing to me was the mission behind it, where it really felt we were analyzing, we were talking. That's probably where the term talking head comes from. But it didn't feel as though I was educating a younger population. And that was what I really wanted to do, was reach a younger audience in the United States and explain to them why what matters abroad matters so much here
Yeah.
and affects us here in ways that people don't realize on a day-to-day basis. And vice versa, what happens here with our elections or our own social media companies or whatever it might be, what happens here matters also very much abroad. And understanding that connection matters a lot because the young generation in particular, I find, has a strong interest in global issues, a strong interest in social good, and this force to fight for something better. And that's why I wanted to reach out to them. And that's why I launched Oh My World and why I did it on YouTube specifically.
Okay. So it's a perfect segue to my next question, which is, who is your audience? And how is that? Has it shifted? Has it stayed the same over time?
My target audience is our young millennials and Gen Z.
Okay.
And every
I
time,
work with a lot of those too.
yes, they are the future.
Yeah.
I often say that they're the ones who are going to save us. When I think of the problems we have, climate change, gun control.
Which is a huge burden for them, by the way.
Yes.
Many of them have said to us that they really feel the weight of that burden because of this expectation that they're somehow going to solve all these problems that, all of our prior generations have collectively created.
Yes, I have to be honest. I wouldn't want to bear that burden. I'm sure, they're born with it in a way. And this is a generation that has lived with internet and phones from the beginning. So they are so much more aware than we were at their age. And that is a pressure on them. That I am certain, creates some level of anxiety when they think about what their own children will face, right? For a variety of issues. But this is the target audience. My biggest surprise in launching this brand has been the wide age range of people who love it. It ranges from age 9 to age 80. And I'm not kidding when I say that. And it's just that each react in a different way.
Sure.
And those who are older they'll reach out after each episode and they'll want to discuss. And I love that.
Yeah.
But when I think about shaping the stories and what stories to cover, I'm thinking about that younger audience.
Okay. Good to know. So in addition to being about the news, your Oh My World videos are also sometimes satire, which I love. Let's take a listen to this one.
But I thought it was funny when I heard former President Trump say that he declassified intelligence just by thinking about it. Oh, is that how it goes? Think, Donald. Think. No. Think harder. No.
Hagar, how do you think about news versus satire? And how satire might be polarizing in an already very polarized society that we live in around the world, not just in the US? And how do you think about, in a sense, as a media personality, there's a responsibility that you feel and sort of live every day when you make an episode of Oh My World. How do you think about that responsibility to educate and inform in the context of satire?
Yes, I get this question a lot because when you talk about a brand that is steeped in a mission of exposing these horrible stories and talking about what's going on around the world, and it's 9 out of 10 times really negative and really heart-wrenching, a lot of people ask me, well, how can you find the satire in it? Yeah. And I'm rarely, if ever, making a joke or making light of a serious situation, whether, for example, a conflict or terrorist attack or human rights abuses or whatever it might be. 9 out of 10 times, it's the world leader I am pointing the satire at.
Yeah.
And satire is a way of educating someone on something and pointing the absurdity in this scenario through satire. And it kind of kneecaps authority in a lot of ways, right? It's certainly when you're talking about authoritarian leaders.
Yeah.
And one of the things I say is that every week it feels like I'm given this free content of absurd and ridiculous things that world leaders say. And it's not just world leaders, it's our leaders as well. But that's usually who I'm directing the satire at. And I try to make sure, certainly when it's domestic, I say that I'm an equal opportunist when it comes to criticizing. It is not meant to lean one way or the other when it comes to left or right. It's really just highlighting the absurdity of what they're saying and that it's not normal and that's not helpful to solving a problem. And then I'll break down. So my videos have a section often when I get nerdy and I say, geek out with me, and I'll put glasses on because I'm just looking to educate and highlight why this matters, why the way this leader reacted is crazy. And I think I find that people like to learn that way. It keeps them engaged. It keeps it interesting. And it makes it a bit easier to absorb something that's really actually awful or heart-wrenching. They can at least learn about it and not feel like the whole world is doom and gloom.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting line, right? Because on the one hand, when things are horrible, there's a reluctance to engage, and we want to encourage that in any way possible. Just the idea of being informed, of understanding what's happening in another part of the world. And satire, I think, as proven by the countless number of nighttime talk shows every night, is such a critical vehicle to educating, but also just furthering understanding in a non-polarizing way, because hopefully people see the humor for what it is and it doesn't turn into a cause of polarization.
Yes, it is. I find it is a fine line that you have to walk. And there are times that I'll draft something and then when I see it on camera, I end up deleting it.
Yeah.
Or when I say it out loud, it just doesn't end up falling the way I'd like to.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll post short snippets on the social media platforms of Oh My World. And without the other context, when you just have the satirical bit, sometimes it comes off insensitive.
Yeah.
Whereas when you include it in this broader part of this is a 2-minute clip or a 1-minute clip where I'm just trying to educate you on this, the satire then fits in much, much better.
Yeah.
So I'm very careful too when I cut those short clips.
Yeah.
It is a fine line that you have to walk, though. And I will say, I think there's a difference between satire and comedy. Comedians, the line of sensitivity is if it's there, it's very blurry.
Yeah.
And comedians are known for that. They're known for making jokes that will offend people that, and sometimes they don't know. Sometimes people get a rise out of it. Sometimes it falls flat and people real deeply get offended. And I try not to even go near that because I don't view myself as a comedian making jokes. It's really more trying to highlight the absurd and speak about these things in a colloquial way. Sometimes it's just by how I react, my face, or how I'll say something in a way that's just a normal expression or that'll make people laugh about it.
Yeah. Love that. Such an important difference, satire and comedy. So in a sense, Hagar, your show is part of what's become an overall trend in news, where more and more of the news is expressed through I'll call it sort of a lens of opinion or with an opinion underpinning it relative to, sort of what used to be just a narration in a sense of the facts, right? That you wanted people to know about something. I mean, you could argue, I feel very conflicted about this even as I say that, because obviously, even when we thought we were hearing the facts, there was always an opinion underlying it, even if it wasn't communicated that way, right? Just by nature of individuals being individuals. How, as you try to be objective, there's a desire for audiences to pigeonhole and categorize you one way or another. How have you dealt with that?
So when it comes to first, you really hit the nail on the head with news and the way it's going. And it's a little shocking how many people can't really differentiate between the news as it's reported when it's analyzed and the opinion part. And I consider myself to sit in the analysis part.
Yeah.
So I'll present the facts of the story, which, by the way, I find the hardest part of it because it feels like an immense responsibility. I'm not a reporter or a journalist, but I do like research and I research well and I have sources I trust, but I will read and read and read multiple sources to make sure I have the most accurate story and make sure every single word is presented accurately.
Yeah.
It's an immense responsibility. So I have that part. The analysis part is what I believe sets me apart or sets Oh My World apart, because I lived in the world of foreign policy and national security for 12 years,
Right.
including handling all sorts of crises, terrorism. During the Arab Spring, I handled Syria, the first 2 years of Syria, and watched what protests, how protests work, how revolutions are, how dictators respond.
Yes.
I've dealt with war, all sanctions, all of these things all this experience that I can bring to bear in explaining to somebody, this is why this matters, or this is how this affects you here, or this is why you should care, or this is how I foresee things happening out in the long term. And I often do a poll. I like to poll the audience and say, what do you think? Do you think this was the right decision by this leader? Or do you think this is what's going to happen in the future? And after the poll is sometimes where I'll say my opinion, but I will say, I believe blah, 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 or my thought, this is where my head's at, or my opinion is XYZ. And I'll do that on TV as well, because I really think that if you're talking about these things publicly, you have a responsibility to state that, to be very clear.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an interesting way that you're describing of straddling that line, because maybe what has made so much media so polarizing is the irresponsibility of that fact research piece, right? Like some people have just become very lazy about researching that fact piece.
Yeah.
And then the opinion layers on top of a very selective rendition of the facts. And, of course, it's all geared to make someone angry about something, which is exactly the effect it has in the end.
Yes. I'll give you an example that was just very recent. When the explosion happened at the Kerch Bridge, the bridge that bridges Russia to occupied Crimea, every news outlet, because they want to be the one to say what happened, they want to give the full story. They know their audience wants to know all the details. The Russian government is the one that came out and said that it was a truck bombing. But anyone should know that you can't take what the Russian government says at face value. Now, by the way, it may have been a truck bombing, but the fact is that we don't know yet. And so when I did my own episode, I kept searching and searching and searching to see. And I noticed, even in sources I trusted, that the truck bombing that was just a theory. And some of them presented it as a theory, but you really had to be very careful and see that. And then when it came to the Ukrainian government admitting, they didn't admit. That was part of their strategy. There was one official that told one news outlet here, and I don't want to point fingers, that said that they did it. Listen, and I say in the video, I point to examples that very likely point to the Ukrainian military having done this explosion. But I never mentioned a truck because we still don't know if that's what happened. A lot of engineers say that's likely not what happened. And I made sure every single word was accurate. But I was stunned in the research and other podcasts I had heard last week just saying it as fact when it was not proving it at all.
I mean, in a way, we've it's not just the media, right? Like, we live in a culture where people seem to think it is better to misstate something and apologize for it later, or redact it or whatever. And that's somehow better than not presenting a view or a piece of information, because then it seems like they were left behind or they weren't in the loop or whatever the kind of implication is. And it's a really unfortunate place to be, because, certainly we see it in every facet, not just in the news and the media. In politics, people sort of take a stand, and then if they're wrong, they'll apologize later. But there's this sort of impetus to constantly take a position and take a stand.
Yes. It's so funny you say that, because I teach a course at Columbia on communications, and it trains students to become spokespeople or directors of communication in the future. And we talk about a number of tips and rules and guidelines that communications directors and spokespeople should always abide by. And one of them, and it seems so obvious, one of them is to never lie.
Yeah.
That sounds very obvious, but you may unknowingly lie as well. And that's lumped into that. And the best example I have of that is when the US government came out in 2012 when our embassy in Libya, in Benghazi, was attacked. And they wanted to rush to point the blame at something, to explain to the US public what happened, why these protests happened, why they attacked the embassy. And they came up with this story of a video that was made here in the United States that was Islamophobic, and that this is what riled up the protesters and caused this attack. And it was later disproven.
Yeah.
But days after the attack, Ambassador Susan Rice, who's wonderful, came out on the Sunday shows and wanted to help defend the administration and used these talking points and explained this story, which was later disproven. And it hurt her career deeply. It prevented her from being Senate confirmed for positions she really wanted. And that is the number one rule. We could have just come out and said, we don't have all the facts right now. We're gathering this as we go. We will keep you updated.
So why is that such an unacceptable thing to say? It feels like for anyone in the spotlight, like so rarely do you hear that statement, right?
Almost never.
Very much in process. We're still gathering the information. Let us come back to you. There's almost this sort of compulsive desire for everyone to say, here are the facts as we know them. We've got this under control. I mean, that's the basic messaging, right?
Yes. I think it's a matter of opinion too on who you ask, because I've certainly had bosses where I've recommended this to them to be a little vulnerable, and audiences like vulnerability.
Yeah.
And you say, we're still gathering the facts and we promise to keep you updated as we have them. But some bosses just don't agree with that and believe that we need to come out with something then
Definitive stance.
yes, as much as we can, and that will absolutely get you into hot waters. I have never seen that land well, ever. There are multiple examples of that. The pandemic, when it first started, is an example of that, and the things the administration was coming up with, right? And so it's a cardinal rule, as I tell my own students: don't lie, unwillingly or willingly. You have to make sure that that you have to hunt down to make sure that your story is actually, in fact, backed up, because it's much worse to go publicly and say, actually, I have to issue a correction. What I said was totally not true. That only makes you look worse. And also, nobody pays attention to a second story or a second headline. They pay
Seemingly not. Exactly. So, Hagar, you picked important snippets of news. You mentioned one, the blowing up of the bridge in the Kerch Strait Bridge in the Ukraine. And you explain them in a very comprehensible way for, I think, as you said, someone who's 9 to someone who's 80, right? Which is wonderful. Let's take a quick look at this short video.
A lot happened in Ukraine. So let me catch you up quickly, and then we'll hear from my favorite Oh My World contributor, Misha Zelinsky, who's back on the ground there. A huge explosion took place on the Kerch Strait Bridge, which links Russia to Crimea, which is occupied by Russia and was illegally annexed in 2014. This explosion is a big deal. First, because this bridge is the only connection between Russia and Crimea, and because Russia uses it to send military equipment into the south of Ukraine. Second, because it's an embarrassment to Putin personally, who oversaw the building of this 12-mile bridge. In fact, he personally inaugurated it by driving a dump truck across it. It's amazing his shirt is still on. It's probably why this explosion was timed as a gift to him on his 70th birthday. Happy birthday, asshole. We don't actually know for sure who or what caused this explosion yet, but Ukraine did issue commemorative stamps, and senior Ukrainian officials tweeted footage of the blast to the tune of Marilyn Monroe singing Happy Birthday, Mr. President. It's clever. Putin responded by saying it was a terrorist attack. That's a little bit catcalling the kettle black, isn't it?
There's a sea of news out there on any given day. How do you pick the things that you want to inform your audience about?
Yes, there are some weeks where it feels like I don't have enough time to cover it in 10 minutes. And that's a key part of the brand. The news has to be quick. The show is 10 minutes, and I strive for less, but it doesn't always happen that way. And each story has to be about 1.5 to 2 minutes. And when I have a barrage of news, the two things I look for the most are which has a nexus to the United States. Anything that has a nexus to the United States is going to be first on the agenda. So if it's a trip by the president, for example, if there's travel, or if there's some kind of U.S. foreign policy angle to it, it's an easy sell for me to explain to the American public why this matters. And then on the other hand, it's something might not have an obvious U.S. nexus, but it just, to me, feels as though I have to share this story because this is important. I'll give you a good example. Right. If I talk about conflict.
Yeah.
Conflict may not always appear as though it matters. We could go around what's happening in Ethiopia, the famine in Somalia. These are things that may not have an obvious next to the United States, but these are things that I feel deeply the public needs to be aware of, because maybe watching that segment will make them make a donation to a charity that's helping. Maybe it's a consumer and they learn that some business that they support is in fact supporting a dictator abroad.
Yeah.
And so they're going to, as a consumer, say they're going to make a social media post or whatever, calling on that business to only have ethical clients or whatever it might be. And so I try to think ahead of, is there a U.S. nexus? And what are the stories that even if there's no obvious U.S. nexus, Americans really need to know is happening out there?
And a reason for engagement, I think, is what you're highlighting, right? Like whether that's conscious or unconscious.
Yes. And that is what are we allowed to curse on this podcast?
Go for it.
Okay, that is what my shit list and crush list are about. So each show has a shit list and crush list. And the shit list highlights something that a dictator may have done or a human rights abuser or someone shitty. I even had US tech companies on there. Something shitty they did that week. And the crush list is obviously who's crushing it around the world or who I'm crushing on. Usually it's an activist or a nonprofit doing something good. And I want to bring attention to it. And I'm a genuine believer. If you have, and this here, I have a great example. A lot of entertainers travel abroad and perform for dictators. They're getting paid for dictators, and the dictators are the ones hosting those events.
Yeah.
And it's almost like whitewashing a little bit, right? Or entertainment washing. Sports is often used in that regard as well. And consumers have a lot more power than they think.
Yeah.
And the young generation in particular feels strongly about this. So if they band together and they say, hey, Justin Bieber, you shouldn't go perform for Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, because last I heard, he brutally murdered a columnist from the Washington Post. It not only does Justin Bieber hear that, but in the long run at least, in the long run, maybe the Saudi government will say, maybe we should start reforming our ways. That's the goal, at least, of my world.
Long-term change.
Mm-hmm.
I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about how you've grown and evolved in your career. You've done a lot of different things. How has coaching and mentorship played a role in that evolution over time?
Yes. I have always loved having mentors. I have many mentors. They range in age, they're men, women, old, young. I've collected them along the way in my career. Some of them were while I was in government and they themselves were government bosses of mine.
Yeah.
Others, I would happen to meet them somehow or some way and find that they had this kind of wisdom about them.
Yeah.
And especially, I think this is the case for anybody, especially in this day and age, but if you have a little ADD like me and you tend to...
You and me both.
Yeah. They say that that's what that many CEOs have ADD, that the best visionaries, those are the most creative. I say it's my secret weapon.
This is what I tell myself every day.
Yes. There are moments it's frustrating.
Yeah.
But I often tell people it's my secret weapon because I will make my own show for an ADD viewer, someone who just can't keep attention for a long time. But that means that you have ideas all the time or that you change your mind all the time. And you need someone to ground you and help you along the way, whether it is that you want to make that career switch or that you have some idea that maybe needs some refining or thinking. And I have so many. One of my, and I call them all champions, by the way.
Yeah.
One of my, I can't even, they're all my favorite. One of the ones that the ones who have helped me the most in launching Oh My World have been women in particular. Mm-hmm. And Gretchen Carlson has been one of them, for example. A friend of mine, Maureen Polo, who's really held my hand. She's comes from this industry of, Gretchen, obviously from media, and my other friend, Maureen, from the world of production and marketing. And
Sid Gretchen's daughter interns with us.
I know that. Yeah. That's right. That's why I figured I'd mention her too. Gretchen has been a constant sounding board. And, I'll update her and we'll meet up. And then I'll tell her, like, is this the right path? And she was actually one of the people, this is why I like to mention her, when she saw me doing all this commentating on air,
Yeah.
she took me out to lunch in 2019, April 2019, and she said to me, "What are you doing? You're great on air. I see you all the time, and you're clearly not getting paid for what you're doing, and that has to stop." And we had this long discussion, and I told her, I said, I would love to be a contributor, but that's not a full-time job. They don't seem to want to pay foreign policy analysts anyway. I kind of want to do something more mission-based and more digital and younger. And she was like, "Well, then great, do it. And I'll help you, but get up and do it because what you're doing now is not working." And having somebody be your mirror like that is really lucky.
Well, I think it's that honesty, right? That even when, because I think so many of us nowadays, and it's hard not to fall victim to this in a way, measure or use as a parameter of success, how many people saw it? How many shows were we on? How many people cited it? Did people like it? Did they like our social media posts, etc.? But her pointing out to you, hey, this isn't really a long-term strategy for success.
Yes.
I've got to sort of rethink this, even though you might be thinking of this as success through a different lens, is those moments of advice and reality checks are often the most valuable.
Yes. And sometimes you don't realize how lost you are
Yeah.
until someone, that's why I call it like a mirror. It's like they're
Yeah.
forcing you to look at the mirror and say, this is actually not working.
Yeah.
Let me help you figure this out. You walk away with this. I remember walking away from that lunch so energized.
Yeah.
Even though she was basically telling me to stop doing everything I was doing, uproot everything and change it all. But I mean, she had some real
But
strategic
it's a
tips.
moment of
But
clarity.
it really was. It was
Yeah.
so great because it set me on the path that I was more meant to be.
Yeah, totally makes sense. So if you had to point to one or two key individuals, you mentioned Gretchen Carlson, but tell me about one or possibly two other individuals who were deeply influential.
Yes. Another one of them is a former boss and mentor, also a mentor of mine, one of my best friends, and all of them become my best friends.
Yeah.
Danny Glazer is his name.
Okay.
And Danny was my boss at Treasury. And he'll start tearing up if he listens to this, by the way. He's such a sentimental guy, but he's kind of one of those, big teddy bears, but also kind of ruthless when it came to sanctions and fighting crime, which is what we did at Treasury together. And so Danny is the one who hired me at Treasury, my first real job back in 2006. And he supported me for every single career change in government.
Yes.
And not just government, but for the entire 12 years I was in government.
Yeah.
He is the one that if I said, I want this job, or I got a job, but it wasn't sure we could make it happen, he would help make it happen. When I got a job at the White House to be director for Syria and Lebanon, that's something Treasury has to fund.
Yeah.
He found a way to do it. When I told him while I was there, I want to switch into public affairs.
Yeah.
I found this knack for media engagement and communications. He was like, "You're right. You'd be great at this." And he's the one who helped me transition to become a spokesperson at Treasury.
Yeah.
And even now I turn to him all the time and say, I don't know. This is what I'm thinking. What do you think about this? I don't know if this is right. And he's just an amazing sounding board and champion of mine. And I love having him in my corner. It's very lucky to have somebody like that holding your hand
Yeah.
through the whole way, especially in government.
I think it's such a key point that you've made because many of our Gen Z, millennial clients that we work with, they really struggle to find what you've described, which is a lifelong, effectively coach and mentor who has been in your corner throughout, even when you were no longer working with that person.
Right.
And all of that is about building relationships with people that are not transactional and that are actually of mutual interest and of mutual sort of emotion in a sense, right? Because the most powerful mentors in my life have been ones that I actually worked with very early on, but like you, stayed involved with me. They became friends, they became coaches in particular regards, and they stayed interested and connected to me throughout, right? And they've always sort of cheered me on, even when what I've done has had absolutely nothing to do with what they do anymore, or the nature of the relationship that we used to have that sort of got the whole thing started.
Yeah.
And that relationship orientation is really, really key.
Yes, especially when you're younger,
Yeah.
you think you might know best. But it's really hard. It's hard to make decisions. It's hard to know how something could play out later in the future, if
Yeah.
it could help you or hurt you. And it's so key. It's why I believe very much in mentoring as well. I mentor a lot of young women in particular, a lot of them my school sends me.
Yeah.
Another one for me, as we were talking, I just thought of is someone, again, I met him during government, but he wasn't in government. His name is Peter Tanis. And an older gentleman,
Yeah.
and has done so much in his career and life. And I would go to him with all sorts of questions when I discovered this love of media engagement.
Yeah.
And I told him, but I'm doing Middle East foreign policy now. How do I go from A to B?
Yeah.
And he was like, okay, I have a plan for you. First, you're going to do this, and then you're going to do that. And then when I launched my consulting business, I had a consulting business when I left government.
Yeah.
I wanted to go into media, as I said, but it wasn't a full-time thing. So I launched a consulting business in the meantime. And I would go to him with questions about clients. I don't know, do I take this one? Do I not? How is this going to pan out? And I made mistakes along the way. And I view mistakes, though, and in general, I think I will probably make many mistakes with Oh My World. And I view them as opportunities to learn and say, I did this, and I learned from that, and now I won't do that again in the future. I don't have regrets really ever because of that. You just view them as mistakes. But Peter has been also amazing in guiding me, and that guidance is critical. Yeah, otherwise you could make many mistakes that are much worse.
Totally.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we're finding in our business, and you mentioned, that you mentor a lot of young women, is that particularly Gen Z and millennials are having a difficult time navigating their post-educational lives.
Yes.
There are a number of life decisions that sort of come into play. Things haven't been easy given the last few years of the pandemic.
Mhm.
There's still a sort of residual stress that remains because we may or may not be fully through it. You interact with a lot of them. They're your audience on Oh My World. What do you see as their challenges and sort of how to overcome them?
Such a good question. For the purposes of this question,
Yeah.
I want to focus on Gen Z in particular because they're very different than
Yes.
millennials.
Yeah.
Extremely
As
different.
Katie points out to us all the time.
Yes, yeah. And most of my interns are Gen Z.
Yeah.
And I love working with Gen Z because they are so hardworking and so passionate and so inspired.
Yes.
But they're going to burn out quickly if they continue working the way they do, which is it's so shocking to hear that. As someone, I find myself as I'm quote unquote a geriatric millennial, though the term is horrifying, which means that's in between.
I don't know what that makes me, but I don't want to ask.
It's between Gen X and millennial, basically. And it means you kind of have qualities of both.
Yeah.
And but anyone from that Gen X realm in general works really hard. Following authority is normal. Working any hour is normal. Whatever your boss needs.
Yeah.
I find Gen Z to be very similar, but they will work on the weekend at night. They're texting me. They're working, and I often feel I have to tell them like, and by the way, it's not just that they're working at every hour. They're taking multiple jobs,
Right.
But that's a problem for them and for the employer as well.
Yeah.
Because you can't take multiple full-time jobs. It doesn't work like you could do multiple part-time jobs.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't advise that as a means of growing your career. You could do that. You have the rest of your life to do part-time freelance.
Well, you don't want to end up in a situation where you're just doing multiple things badly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so some of them I'll mentor. I'll tell them like, listen, let me remove my Oh My World hat for a second. And let me just tell you, for your own health and your own career, you should seek a full-time employment where you can make friends with the other colleagues, where you establish these relationships with mentors, and also where you focus deep on that one thing you're working on that will lead you to the next step.
Yeah.
Whereas working 24/7 and a multiple jobs, it's a quick way to burn out and not an easy way to move ahead.
Yeah.
Also.
Totally.
Does that answer your question?
It does. I think what you're pointing to, I mean, to me, it's indicative of two things, right? I think there is a real shift and a real difference. I mean, not that one should generalize, but let's just do it for 1 second. A lot of employers feel that millennials are not willing to make many of those trade-offs and sacrifices and compromises where they're so singularly focused on work-life balance in a way that they've sort of forgotten that there are some times and some things that require a spirit of compromise where you're working more and sometimes you're working less and so on, right? And Gen Z, I think, very acutely feels the pressure of needing to access and capitalize all the opportunity, all and any opportunity that comes their way, because they're trying to de-risk, their career and their success, which is like a super normal thing for anyone to do. And at the same time, there's that sort of, the realization that, well, in doing that, you might actually jeopardize yourself. And by the way, like fully amplify your own capability and your own anxiety level and stress level in terms of being able to do all of these different things, because it's very hard to be pulled in so many different directions at one time.
Yes, it's impossible.
Yeah.
And nobody wins.
Yeah.
In that regard, it's and I see it a lot.
Yeah.
I see it over and over again. And one of the things I also mention when I teach my class: if somebody wants to become a spokesperson or comms director, the job is inherently 24/7 because the press is 24/7. And it's funny, my class now is a younger class, and they don't seem fazed by that. They're just kind of like ready to jump in and dive in. But previous students have been put off a little bit by that. But I have to be honest about it.
Yeah.
And say this is not the type of job where you can say, it's 5 p.m. I'm off right now, or I'm at a yoga class, or it just doesn't work like that. There's a crisis, it'll be interesting to see how. I know that a lot of corporations, bigger corporations, are trying to find meaningful ways to address those needs. And I wish I had bosses that addressed those needs in government.
They're never asked.
Yes, I certainly why one of the main decisions that made me leave government when I did, which was when my second boy was born, was that there was zero way to have work-life balance with 2 young children, and I couldn't be the mom I wanted to be. And that's a shame, but it is what it is. It remains like that in government. So I'll be interested to see how things evolve in this way, and how each side kind of finds a meeting point that works.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I'm glad you raised motherhood, because that's my last question for you. You've pursued a hugely successful career. You've done a lot of different things while being a mother to 3 children.
It's so easy.
Add partner to a spouse. Let's not forget that part. That's a whole set of responsibilities too.
Yes, 4th child.
How have you done it? What's your advice for, when I think back to, I'm a Gen Xer. When I think about the women I know, so many of them felt so compromised by that position of this sort of onus, in a way, of the expectation of having a career while being super mom, while being a great wife, while being skinny and everything else. It was just too much. And the piece that they ended up giving up was the work piece. How have you navigated that?
I have so many thoughts on this issue, so I will try to be brief. But to answer the first part of your question, I don't do it all. And I don't think anybody can. And I have a village of help to help me. Yeah. I have my nanny. I have multiple backup sitters, neighbors, and so on. I have my parents who live 10 minutes away. This is a big, big part of how I'm able to dive to my career, because they have priceless relationships with my kids, and they take them for sleepovers, and they are picking them up from school, and they're taking them to tennis, and so on, between them and the nanny. And it's because I have 3 of them on top of it. I really felt I had struck that elusive work-life balance when I had 2 kids.
Yeah.
And both were in school almost full time. One was full day, the other one was almost full day. And it was 2 of them. And I had a live-in nanny, and I had my consulting business that was really part-time, actually, and was doing these TV hits. And I found that I had struck this balance. If I wanted to do something for me, I could. If I wanted to go to the gym or go to a social event, it was not a problem. When I had a 3rd and launched my business, my world, everything went upside down.
Yeah.
I then realized I wasn't actually working full time, and that's how I had struck said balance.
Yeah.
But I wasn't happy. I wasn't doing what I was passionate about also. And building Oh My World, where any startup, any business of your own, you feel you could work on it 24/7.
Totally.
And that you're never going to get through that list. And when you have a third, in general 3, but also a young baby on top of it, you feel like you're drowning at all times. So I tell people all the time, and I made a joke about this on my own Instagram. I do a lot of funny videos on Instagram to trending music. And I said, all of you ask me all the time, how do I do it all as a mom and I have a business? And I joke and I was like, just here's my secret. And I moved back and I had these balls in my hand. I was like, I just juggle it all. And I threw the balls in the air. And not only did those balls fall, but a whole box of balls fell on top of me. Because that is my daily, that is how it is.
Yeah.
I have maybe 70,000 unread emails in my Gmail. It's really bad. I'm very fortunate to have a husband who takes on work related to his own job, but anything related to the house, school, camp, activities, forms, insurance, he handles all of that.
Yeah.
And it's a very lucky partnership. And that is a big part of the formula in making it work.
100%.
Thanks, Boop. I love you. I may not say it enough.
We'll make sure he hears that.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for what you do. It's really important work.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening today. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please do review the show. We love hearing from you. So email us at info@theideamix.com or Instagram DM us. Our episode this week was produced by the incomparable Martin Milewski, with music by the awesome Nashville-based singer-songwriter Doug Allen. You can learn more about Doug at dougallenmusic.com.